It's an honor to be here to talk to you guys. Thank you, Miranda. Thank you for Speed for inviting me to basically talk about, present some ideas and experiences that I've come across in terms of being here and coming to Kentucky. The project, is the project I'm thinking about. I keep saying thinking because it's evolving. Is really about, and I guess maybe this is a little bit of the notion of what an object might mean, or the expectation for an object. In all the objects I've chosen, it's great to hear about this idea of the everyday, because I think that's something that I try to think about in my work. And I've been kind of, in a way, pigeonholed as a found object artist. And it's a kind of strange, and it's cool, it's all right. But the reason that I'm gravitating towards these things are because they are everyday, because they do carry content, they do carry individual experiences. And so it's always the starting point for the conversation. And that conversation for me is really about trying to create a moment for the viewer that they can be introspective, right? So it's this really delicate thing of my intention and my purpose of transforming something or mediate what I would call craft, right? Right. So what I'm excited about when I see an artist who can use craft and then have that craft not be directed specifically at how the thing is made, but that craft is used for declaring the moment so the viewer can participate on some other deeper level. It almost always happens in a devotional object, right? There's this sort of inundation of the surface of something to carry you into another kind of mental space or spiritual space. So there's this kind of expectation. So I look a lot to things that come from that space, or even folk artists do that a lot, and I'm curious about how they navigate their intention. And the great thing about folk, I'm always envious of folk artists. I'll tell you why. In a way, because they don't have to contend with history, art history, and they don't have the same prerequisite of a contemporary art of being original, right? They can burrow down into their vision, and in burrowing down, they can open up possibilities for themselves. There's another artist that you guys show, and then you hear a lot about, and is an artist that I always wonder about, and I love her work, but it's one, and this artist like this is Deborah Butterfield, I think it's Sarah, and she does only horses. And I always love this idea that you can, and it's not me, that's why I actually love it, that you can create a boundary and a limit and a kind of specificity of form or species in this case, and that within that you have to create, you have to invent, right? And I think that inventing, creating your own limitations so that it's forcing you to invent, for me is a really interesting space to try to try to develop ideas around. So I'm going to start with a piece that I think you guys know here because it's in the collection of this piece, and I'm not going to go on too long because I want to have time to talk about the collective talk that we're going to have. But let me go here. So this is a piece that's in the collection called We the People. And I just want to give you a sense of how this piece evolved and why I felt the need to reconsider this text. And maybe it'll give a kind of backdrop into how I'm thinking about the piece for the Speed here. So I was interested in things that folks don't care to think about, or they see it so much it doesn't really have the same level of meaning or reflection for them. And I was doing a project at the Fabric Workshop in Philadelphia, and another component that I'm really excited about in the challenges and parameters that artists set up for themselves is site. So you're in a particular site, and you figure out, okay, what in this site am I relating to, or what is contentious, or what is inspiring, and can those elements be brought into one form, one experience, And can that experience then be layered for, and how can I layer it? How can I find a way to layer it? So I'm in Philadelphia. It's the sort of, the very important, place in American history for creation of the Constitution. And so, Fabric Workshop, I'm working with this in a residency, and I had just started doing a body of work, which is strange to people that I was using text, right? They're like, oh, this guy, he finds garbage on the street. What is he doing with text? But it goes back to me thinking about power, right? These metaphor for powers, right? And so I was in my neighborhood. There's a mat in Harlem. There's a kind of big transformation going on, and it's being generated by corporations, and I was seeing a lot of Chase Bank kind of banners put up, construction fences. And I got a chance to really think about this, because what was really interesting is I've lived on my one block on 141st Street for maybe 10 years, maybe 12 years, and there was an empty lot next door to me. So that week, Chase Bank puts up a blue sign, a banner that says Chase, strengthening our neighborhoods, right? And so I've been on this block, and I think I've talked to my neighbors maybe twice. Maybe some shootout or something happened, or we might have said something. Now, within that week after, every one of my neighbors going down the street would say, "Oh, Chase is coming in. You see that? The Chase is now. They have now a banner next to your building," and I really was like, "Wow, these folks are talking to me." So like the Chase became like the weather, right? It's like this thing that affects us, but we don't really have any control over, and so we can talk about it and be safe. And so I started to think, I started making these Chase Bank weather maps. Or just basically, it's just as simple as that. It's like, oh, weather, power, let's just talk about how we're affected by it and how we can analyze it. And so that kind of led me to the notion of I can take a symbol of power and then find a way to usurp it and try to park other kinds of meaning within it. And scale was really an important endeavor for that, because I really wanted to think about how the body can get involved in something as simple as a text, right? So the idea was to take something specific to the body, like shoelaces, right? We all know how to tie shoelaces, and maybe, in fact, I would even beg to argue that shoelaces might be the first craft that we actually learn in a lot of ways to engage in, to sort of just tie our shoes. And so the idea was to blow this text up, this "We the People," so you can't ignore it. You have to relate to it in terms of your body. And then the other idea I had was how to fracture it. And what you see here, is actually, laces that are put into the wall, screwed. There's holes, and then the laces are sort of poked into the wall. And for me, that was really primary, because what happens is there's a level of abstraction that happens at certain moments. You're not quite sure what you're looking at, and depending on the distance. So your position within the room changes the legibility of the text and your experience of the text. And I really I felt like that said a lot about the symbolic term of what "we the people" might mean. Which people, how does that term really affected my understanding of myself or my community? So then it comes to now, Miranda was generous enough to say, "Nari, think about this space." I came here was it a year now, Miranda? It's a year. And Kentucky is amazing, right? I came to know that it's more than it is. I kind of declared the only thing that I knew about Kentucky, of course, was Colonel Sanders. And I kind of felt like that was good. I could set the record straight and come here and really think about it as a historical journey. And come to find out, y'all didn't really fight for the South. You were fighting for the North, and I didn't know that, because you really embrace the idea of the kind of cliche Southern expectations, the Colonel, mint julep, and so I was intrigued by that, and it's actually it was a smart reason to do that, because it was really about taking part in the rebuilding of the South and benefiting financially from that. So I really got to appreciate that as well, the clever nature of that. So when I came, Miranda was nice, and I found this. This was great. Ward's Kentucky Specialties. And so what I was intrigued with this is, not because my name is on it, but because I really love the idea of symbols, the fact that it's pineapple, and pineapple is like the cliche hospitality kind of fruit, right? So I really had to have this presented. And the other thing that Miranda was nice enough to bring me to was the bourbon industry, and really enjoy the boom of that. And I think that's a major thing that's happening now in terms of how this state or how things are going to evolve. So we went on a tour. Thank you, Miranda, for that as well. And the consuming the different kinds of spirits was really a key part of that, I'm kind of joking, but the thing is, this is what I do. This is what I do as an artist. I kind of go to these places and become a tourist, right? And what happens is I never have a prescribed route. Like I'm just say, oh great, Miranda, we're here, so what are we going to do, right? And so she has the burden of trying to take me around and sort of show me different things. And we start with the cliche, and then I always say, bring me to the hood. That's like the given. So I got to know what the other part of life is like, here. And so we sort of go through, and it is a drive-by. It is that, But what happens though is, and if I wanted to show that the memorial that's no longer there, but I do want to say that what happens is I go away and I try to forget everything. That's just a little bit of my process. And, I say, Miranda, thank you. It's been a great time, and I won't talk for, a week or two. And then what I'm trying to do is just like figure out what comes back up. What, after my reflection about this journey, what sort of sneaks back up on me, or what anxieties kind of develop. And so, of course, this was one source of anxiety, and so I was thinking about how to make a conversation about the Confederate Memorial. And then Miranda called and said, oh, I got news for you, the memorial is no longer there. So that was interesting because I had to sort of figure out where I needed to go with this. And so I went to see the bats. It's just really great, Louisville. I actually had a great experience at Louisville Slugger, right? I'm going to just throw this in there. I'm trying to be. So I was doing a project with, it was a project I was doing for the Whitney Museum. And I wanted to work on this small idea I had where I wanted to talk about violence and aggression. And I thought, well, if I'm going to talk about that, I really want to think about a club, sort of primordial device, this club. And what else could I consider? In my neighborhood, in Harlem, I would go into these bodegas and I would always see, because it's illegal to have a gun, right? They would have a bat somewhere in some proximity. I said, this is really, primitive in some ways, but necessary maybe. And I wanted to figure out how to deal with this idea of violence on this kind of very basic sense. So I said, and also like, we think about baseball as like the all-American sport. And it was a critique. There's also a critique thrown in there, not a direct critique, but critique of America's violence. And so, but I didn't want to just have it become about blaming. It was really about figuring out how to take this symbol, and how to re-energize it or create a different kind of expectation for it. So what I started doing was I sort of scorched these bats to transform them. And then I was using cotton, cotton as a metaphor for healing, not necessarily cotton picking. And I would then connect this healing element onto the bats. So it would be a bat that was scorched, that would inundate it with hundreds of little ironed cotton that were nailed on. And so I wanted to make a kind of an experiential field for that, right? I did two, and I said I want to do more, so that it relates to the body and a different kind of scale. And so I would go to the bodega guys and said, hey, I have this aluminum bat. Would you mind trading your wooden bat? Because they had to be wooden, right? Because I nailed into them. And there were none of them. Even though I had this gleaming aluminum bat, they had no interest in trading. It was just like, it was a real interesting primal connection to this thing that they had. So I said, how am I going to do this? This show is coming up. I reached out to Louisville Slugger. I said, I'm an artist in New York. I'm doing this project. And they were like, oh, great. Send us a picture of the bat you're interested in. And somebody, I don't know how it happened, they said, yes, we'll send you, how many do you need? And I said, I need 365. I thought they would, for each day of the year. And I just had to pay for the shipping. Apparently, if they have a little defect in the printing, they have no need for them. And so I always have, when Miranda says, do you want to go to Louisville Slugger? I said, yes, sure, I want to go to Louisville Slugger. They're great. They're fantastic. So they really were amazing to work with. And yeah, so this is part of it. Anyway, the other part of this I really got intrigued with. We went to Churchill Downs. And we didn't go to Family Day, unfortunately. But I love this promotion for Family Day. Great idea, Mom. So this was really, so this is another thing that sort of came up, the importance of the racing industry here, right? And the importance of this guy, Muhammad Ali, right? And we went to the Muhammad Ali Center. And so that's his robe, People's Choice. That's the next lace piece I'm going to make, by the way. I can't not do that, you know. So the dots are already there, so I'm just even thinking about that. So another thing I saw was this. This is really interesting and important, which was they were revamping. I know some of you probably remember this. They're revamping this section of town, downtown maybe, and they really wanted to retrofit it for being a distillery. And so they wanted to keep the sense of its history in the front. So these, I call them holding blocks. I don't even know what they call them in construction. But these holding blocks were temporarily put in place so that they could do a kind of different kind of manufacturing in the back end of the building. So here's another view of it. So I really got this image of this block and these things holding up history really kind of resonated. Another thing that I really got intrigued with is, of course, from Churchill Downs, is the history of the African-American jockey here. And something I knew nothing about. This was totally new news for me. And I thought this was something that I really wanted to consider for the piece. So my first proposal, I'm showing you a bunch of directions. And I guess maybe there are actually two different directions. And then somewhere we'll find a place that that makes sense. I don't think right now we're still resolving this. So this is my first proposal, right? I think it's called the configuration preserved. So it was. I play a lot with titles. Titles keep me up at night as well. Like the title is everything because it sort of gives you a different position to read. So I never really want the title to go directly there, but it also is as an image or as a, maybe even a kind of poetic dissonance. There's something about how I'm trying to engage with the different expectations. The reserve is, has to do with the bourbon. The configuration is a little bit of a play on Confederation in some ways. But okay, so this piece was my idea, right? Jockey Jimmy Winkfield, flat portrait silhouette constructed of bourbon barrels and metal banding supported with cement and gold leaf metal tubings. So this was really essential because in the background was going to be the Confederate memorial, right? And this dark figure of African-American man, large scale, was going to be juxtaposed with this. For me, that was the conceptual tension that really made this work. And the history of the black jockey. Really great little sidebar. This is what's really interesting. When you do these projects, you go down all these alleys that make no sense, but for your own maybe party favor jokes or conversation. So the jockey, right, the lawn jockey that we all also want to get off front lawns of America. Normally they have him as African American. It actually came about as a term strangely enough, as a symbol of endearment and trust. Apparently there was, George Washington had a slave named Jocko. And Jocko was left behind when he was crossing the Delaware. and he was asked to. He wanted to come along, but George Washington said, "We need somebody to hold the lantern. We need somebody so we'll know how to come back across. You know, it's dark and we're coming back at night. We need to have somebody there." And so apparently he held the position, but died from frostbite. He died, unfortunately. And so Washington decided to make a kind of memorial for him. And he made a statue of his slave holding the lantern. And so it unfortunately turned into a kind of derogatory term, and for good reason, because it's a very docile image. But the lawn jockey comes from this place, Jocko. So I was intrigued by this strange narrative. So when Miranda called me and said, "Good news and bad news, the Confederate memorial is no longer there. The bad news is, what are you going to do?" Right? So I didn't really feel like I could keep working with this idea. The conceptual tension for me wasn't about making a figure out of bourbon barrels and banding. It was really about the dialogue with this historical moment, right? And the tension of that historical moment. So it came back down to me thinking about this piece, which is, this is another proposal. It's called But Together. So I got on this really interesting space of, okay, let me get back to these holding blocks. And what are they holding? They're holding nothing. What if they were just holding a conversation about the body, right? And so the idea is that this open space in the middle was really a kind of stage that would be programmed by the Speed and the museum, rather the school, the university, and different events can kind of happen there. So the one other thing I do want to say, when this conversation about craft, there's also this, and everyday, there's also this element of chance that I think I always fight for in my work. It's like, how can chance, because craft sort of works against chance in a lot of ways, unless that craft is so inundated that you can't take it in one moment, right? Because then you have to look away and then something else happens, you look back and something else happens. So I'm really interested in how time is engaged when you're in this conversation with these things. So the scale of it is really important for that, you know, so that you can't take, you may not be able to just take it in as you would a painting or a drawing, that you have to navigate space. And so for me, this idea was really about that. And there was a really interesting, maybe we'll talk about it there's a really interesting, for me, correlation between the Confederate flag and Kikongo cosmogram, right, coming from the cross, right, these correlations. And I was interested in figuring out how to bring that into this, because the piece was really about talking about a sense of equality. Even if there's disparity, there's still a kind of togetherness. And so the title of it was ... but together, right? And so it was acknowledging that things are not right, but at least there is, we're here together, and we have to figure it out. And so there was a real kind of optimistic component to it, you know. What I really was intrigued with also is the possibility of these holding blocks, the surfaces of them, being inundated with content, right? They and we went to the fossil today to see. I'll show you this image from your own lobby, right? So that the casting of the blocks was consistent with some material, including the bourbon barrel being brought back in, including maybe some kind of ghostly appearance and ambiguity of the jockey. So that this is, and even within the sense of the poles, which are illuminated at night, there would be the diamond form, which I actually want to develop more. This idea of the Kikongo symbol and the dialogue with the cross, which became, which is the Scottish symbol that the clan, and even Alabama, kind of put into their mythology, but coming from similar conversation about regeneration. So there's a really interesting spaces that I want the piece to open up, and we're still figuring it out. And I just wanted to show you. But one thing I did want to bring up, which because I'm doing gentleman, I forgot his name, that was talking about the memorial turning into a skating ramp, is I'm doing a skating ramp in Detroit. And that was one of my main concerns why these steps have handrails, because you have to figure out how to make them not go the full distance. So anyway, so this is the process, and this work is evolving. My anticipation is, and my hope is, that if we can't do the full-on environment, which is complicated, that we can figure out a way. I'm trying to figure out a way to bring in the history and different moments in history, and still have it open for the abstraction of time, so that, or somebody's connection to materiality, right? Because I think that's what I'm trying to mediate, is your interest in what this material is doing, but then your brain's interest in how am I connected to this historically. And so how can those two moments be in a choreographed position that can still keep that tension, which is what the memorial was offering for me, and now I have to create the tension in some other way. So anyway, that's my process. So thank you.